Welcome to the program. Before we dive into our top story today, I would like you to show a video. I would like to show you a video. This is from the press conference in Israel yesterday.
אני אסייע לו באמצעות חפיפה מסודרת ויסודית כמה זמן שצריך. יש מדינה לנהל.
כמה סמלי.
Did you hear that? Well, that was Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. They were announcing the collapse of the coalition government. What happened next was something that could not have been scripted. As Bennett announced the collapse, lights went out in the hall. When the power came back, Yair Lapid murmured, "How symbolic." This moment has summed up Israeli politics in the last 3 years. Elections and more elections. The coalition government in Israel has collapsed. Israel is heading to its 5th elections in over 3 years.
We spared no efforts to galvanize whomever was needed to pass the regulations, but unfortunately, our efforts bore no fruit. Therefore, my friend, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, and I decided to act together to dissolve Parliament and set an agreed-upon date for elections.
Bennett and Lapid were leading what was Israel's most diverse government in history. In just over a year, the new government has run its course. The coalition lost its majority after multiple lawmakers quit the government. The government had a wafer-thin majority to begin with. After 3 lawmakers quit, the government was at the brink of collapse. So the coalition heads have now decided to dissolve the Knesset. Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid will dissolve the Knesset next week. The two leaders say they have exhausted all efforts to stabilize the coalition.
מה שקרה בימים האחרונים, מה שקורה כאן הערב.
What has happened in the past few days, what has happened here tonight, is further proof that the Israeli system is in need of serious change and major repairs. A year ago, we started the process of rebuilding, and now we are carrying it on together.
The Israeli coalition government was a mix of 8 parties spanning from the far right to the far left. It was the first coalition government to ever be backed by an Arab party, but while diversity was its strength, it was also the government's Achilles heel. The coalition has been fragile ever since it took office. From the start, the government focused too much on consensus, thus ignoring divisive topics and politics, like the Israeli-Palestine conflict. The Arab party called out the government's stance on the Palestine issue. Both the left and the right had the same claim. They believed that the government swung too far to the other side. Things got worse after the recent violence and terror attacks. Ultimately, it was Bennett's own Yamina lawmakers that quit the government, resulting in its collapse. Once the government is dissolved, Lapid will take over as the country's caretaker prime minister. This is until a new government is sworn in. Lapid will also be the one to greet US President Joe Biden when he visits Israel next month. Yair Lapid will also continue as acting country's foreign minister. As for Bennett, he will hold the Iran file in the interim government. The elections are likely to take place on October, after all the Jewish holidays. Reports suggest that the coalition's plan is to have an elections on their own terms. They did not want to be forced out by Benjamin Netanyahu, but the new vote could set stage for Bibi's return to power. Netanyahu's camp is already courting members of the Knesset. The former prime minister has 2 options ahead of him. He can gather enough members and form an alternative government. This could be a win-win situation for all. Israel would not have to go through another election, and Benjamin Netanyahu will be back as Israel's prime minister. But if Netanyahu does not have the numbers, Israel will go to polls again. Even there, Likud could emerge as the biggest party. Opinion polls predict that Netanyahu's Likud could receive 36 seats, while Lapid's Yesh Atid could get 20 seats. Even then, the two sides would still have to cobble up a coalition. So even with elections, a clear majority for either side is highly unlikely. Over a year ago, Israel's Change Coalition government was a mix of bitter enemies. All of its politicians had very little in common, but they were all united behind a single goal: to oust Benjamin Netanyahu out of power. But a year later, it looks the same government has paved the path for Israel's longest-serving prime minister to return back to power. And for more on this, our correspondent Jody Cohen has sent us this report from Ranana.
In the latest, the coalition government could bring forward the vote on dissolving Israel's parliament as early as Wednesday. This in an attempt to prevent former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from potentially being able to form a coalition government based on the former election results. If, as expected at this stage, the country is heading to elections, PM Naftali Bennett will become alternate Prime Minister with responsibility for the Iran portfolio. And as set out in the current coalition agreement, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid will become interim Prime Minister until a new government is sworn in. With elections possibly to be set for the end of October and polls indicating a continuing deadlock between the pro and anti-Bibi camps, this means Lapid could be interim PM for some time. This is Jody Cohen for WION World is One.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.